I Love CVille Show. My name is Jerry Miller. Thank you kindly for joining us. A good Wednesday afternoon to you and yours. A pleasure to connect with you guys through the I Love CVille Network, where we've become the platform of influence and the platform of news, undoubtedly in Central Virginia. This show is long-form content that cannot be taken out of context and encourages you, the viewer and listener, to offer your thoughts and perspective live on air. We'll spend about 50 minutes to 60 minutes with a friend of the program and David Toscano. This man is a talented Renaissance gentleman, a retired mayor, a retired delegate, a man who spent ample time on Charlottesville City Council, a man who knows Charlottesville inside and out. Some would say he knows Charlottesville like the Pope knows holy water. Now, David Toscano is a published author of not one, but 2 books. We're going to explain to you where you can buy these books, where you can learn about these books, and we're going to give you a glimpse of someone we're proud to call a friend of the show. Judah Wickhauer is our North Star of this infrastructure. Judah, we would be remiss not to highlight you. We salute and applaud the Savannah College of Art and Design, Judah Wickhauer. If we could go to the studio camera and then the 2-shot, and let's welcome David Toscano to the show. My friend, good afternoon to you. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to be back here again. It's great to hear about your family and what you're doing with your business activities. And thanks for all you do to educate people about what's going on in Charlottesville and around the Commonwealth, for that matter.
It's absolutely our pleasure. We love doing this. My friend, the show is yours. Give us an update on David Toscano's life. Another book out, which we will get to here in a matter of moments. Anywhere you want to go.
Well, I think, if you recall, I retired from 14 years in the General Assembly in 2020, and just before the pandemic hit. And I'd been in the process of returning to my law firm. I practice law on a regular basis with my partner, Frank Buck. We've been doing it together for 25 years. And I began working on a book about politics and policy and the personalities that undergird how things get done. That book turned out to be 1,100 pages long, and my publisher said, well, you can't publish anything that big, so I split the book in 2. So book number 1, which is called Fighting Political Gridlock, is all about how the states around the country shape our nation and our lives in everything from what people can run for Congress, how congressional lines are drawn, how your educational system gets funded, what the curriculum looks like, who goes to jail and for how long, even energy policy. And the second book became Bellwether. And Bellwether is all about Virginia's political transformation between 2006 and 2020. And we have a lot to say about that because a lot has changed in Virginia since the time I got into the General Assembly between 2006 and 2020. So I'm happy to be here to talk about all that.
It's great to have you. Vanessa Parkhill is watching in Earlysville. We love when you watch the program. Crozet, hello and welcome to the show. Danville, hello and welcome to the program. Asheville, North Carolina, Naples, Florida, and folks out Philadelphia on our heat map. Let's go with Bellwether first. And Bellamy Brown, watching the program, said, I just received both books a couple of weeks ago. And Bellamy Brown, an all-around nice guy, cannot wait to read Toscano's 2 books. This one here, Bellwether, the foreword by U.S. Senator Tim Kaine. The first book, Fighting Political Gridlock, the foreword by Senator Mark Warner. This man is a connected individual. Bellwether first, my friend. The show is yours on what is undoubtedly a hot read.
Well, and Bellwether also has an endorsement by former governor, Republican governor, Bob McDonnell, whose views we did not share together, but he respected the book, and I spent a lot of time with him interviewing him. So it tries to cross political lines, as always, and tries to reflect on what people's views are about the policies of the day. But, you go back, Mark Warner and Tim Kaine I've known for a long time. Tim Kaine was elected to statewide office, to the governorship in 2006, the same year I was elected to the House of Delegates. So I have some fondness for him. Of course, Mark Warner, our time together goes back even farther. And so these folks were very nice to write the foreword. And they reflect real changes that have gone on in the Commonwealth in the last 2 decades. You take a look at Mark Warner. When Mark Warner was elected governor, this Commonwealth was ruby red. And in order to win a statewide race in Virginia, Warner did a lot of campaigning in the Southwest and the South Side, places that are typically viewed as very Republican-oriented counties. And his whole campaign strategy was based on trying to get as many votes out of there as he possibly could. By 2006, things had really changed dramatically in Virginia. And Tim Kaine's entire strategy, which we call a crescent strategy, i.e., he needed to rack up the votes in Northern Virginia through Richmond and out to Hampton Roads. His whole strategy was predicated on that. He won that race, and every Democrat has proceeded to run that kind of race since Kaine won. And where have we gotten? Well, in 2008, Barack Obama becomes the first Democrat elected by Virginia electors to the presidency since Lyndon Johnson, 50 years. And then we have, of course, Hillary gets elected by Virginia electors. Of course, we had Tim Kaine running for vice president. Biden prevails by large numbers. And every statewide office holder, except for Bob McDonnell, up until the recent election of Governor Youngkin, basically were Democrats. That reflects some really basic demographic changes in the Commonwealth, and also reflects things like Donald Trump being in the president's office.
We have chapters of your book in front of us, chapters 3 and 4, in fact. And you touch on this in your book. You've touched on this in an interview with Sandy Hausman of Radio IQ. Let's talk Youngkin. And this is a comment that's come in from Virginia Beach. Jerry, can you please ask Delegate Toscano how the shift happened from a blue to what could be a purple, if not even a reddish state, with Youngkin in the governor's mansion right now? Explain that shift.
Well, you know, part of it is that the blueness of the Commonwealth was really influenced a lot by Donald Trump. His divisive policies were not close to being embraced by Virginia voters. In fact, his poll numbers in Virginia were about the lowest that you could ever expect. Part of that has to do with Northern Virginia and their orientation to Washington, D.C. There are a lot of people who work in the federal government, and there are a lot of people who felt politically assaulted by his attack on the so-called deep state and people who worked in D.C. And that was reflected in a backlash against Republican candidates, especially in Northern Virginia. And that was happening all during the mid part of the decade, where Democrats were really picking up steam and eventually got to become the majority in the House of Delegates in 2019. But Youngkin is an interesting dynamic. There were a couple of things that happened, some of which people pay attention to and kind of have included in their views of things. Others people have not thought about. Well, for one thing, Biden is in the president's office now when Youngkin runs. And there's traditionally a backlash against the party that is in the executive office in D.C., who's the president. That was certainly happening in the Youngkin election. It certainly played a role. Another thing, Youngkin ran more as a centrist. He tried to distance himself from Trump. He knew that Trump's numbers were terrible. And he's governing a little bit closer to some of the Trump approaches, but he didn't run that way.
That's true.
And he ran, it's ironic, by the end of the campaign, he was perceived as the education candidate, which is usually something that Democrats take a hold of. The third thing is you can't overlook some of the things that McAuliffe said on the campaign trail.
Parents and education?
Parents. Yeah. And, you know, that was a misstep. I don't think he really believed that. I think it just sort of came out in frustration.
Multiple times.
But he certainly stuck with it. And we all know that parents matter. And a candidate needs to talk about how parents matter in the context of school boards and what they do, teachers what they do, administrators what they do. Parents should not have total veto power over everything that happens, but you've got to have them involved at the table in trying to help set policy. I think that was a really big mistake, and I think that undermined some of McAuliffe's efforts, especially in Northern Virginia. And I'll say one more thing, and this is something that very few people think about. How did Junkin get nominated to become the Republican nominee? He got nominated in a process that a lot of us thought looked pretty chaotic at the time. We had people driving in to cast their votes. But what's interesting about the process is it was like a ranked choice voting process, where the purpose of the process was to get somebody not to a plurality of the vote, but to a majority of the vote. And it's quite possible that Junkin does not get nominated without that process, because it took out some of the extremists, people like Amanda Chase, that might have been able to capture a plurality of the vote and become the nominee. If that had happened, the Democrats definitely would have won again. It didn't happen, and Junkin was the nominee. It's a fact that most people don't think about, but it's one I think that contributed to his winning the election.
I love this show already. I'm a political junkie. I can't wait to take a deep dive on everything you said here. Let's talk the Junkin-McAuliffe deciding factor. From our standpoint, we follow this closely. You're in the middle of it. You know these folks inside and out. When McAuliffe said it not once, not twice, but 3 times, that parents shouldn't be empowered with their kids' education. Essentially, that's what he said. That really rattled and frustrated my wife and I. And we had frank conversations over the breakfast table and the dinner table about those comments. Because as parents that watch this program know, so all of us know, our children, our offspring, our hearts, our heartbeats. And we want to be active, especially as they're younger and they're more formidable years with their education. How much of a factor in hindsight do you think those 3 statements, 3 different times that he made, and then Junkin's campaign, smart, they capitalized on that. And they started 45 days before the election, you started seeing the ads all over the Commonwealth where they were playing those sound bites over and over again from Terry McAuliffe. In hindsight, how much of a factor did that play?
You know, that's a fascinating question. I'll give you my personal view, and I'll also tell you what the polling data indicate. McAuliffe got 600,000 more votes this time than last. That's a huge increase in the turnout. But of course, Junkin outperformed McAuliffe's opponent. The polls, the post-election polls, were all over the map as in terms of whether this comment flipped the election. That being said, and I'm a big Terry McAuliffe supporter. I mean, I'm as strong a supporter of Terry McAuliffe as anyone is. I thought he was a great governor, did some wonderful things, even though he had a legislature that was totally Republican. And remember, this is a guy who grew up a mile away from me when we were youngsters. He went to Bishop Ludden High School, and I went to Westall High School in Syracuse, New York. And, you know, we joked that I fitted him for his high school prom tuxedo at my father's formal wear store. I mean, we go back a long way, and I'm a big supporter. But I had to tell you, when I heard that come out of his mouth, I said, oh my God, you got to figure out a way to walk this back. And instead, there was a tendency to double down. I think that was a mistake. You know, I don't know how he would feel today, but I think that did have a role. That's a personal view, and that's independent of what the polls are saying.
I agree with that personal view. I think that's what happened there. Let's talk about the shift in strategy with Junkin running his campaign and then once he got into office. When he was running his campaign, he was a sleeves rolled up kind of guy. He had the tie either at half mask or not even on. And he was doing a phenomenal job of appealing to suburban soccer moms. Suburban soccer moms who otherwise were voting Democrat year in and year out. He connected with them through education. Very smart campaign. Mm-hmm. He ran a campaign of being in the center. Right. He ran a campaign of being pro-parent. And then when he got into office, and I'm going to hold the governor a little accountable here. When he got into office, immediately you saw a shift. And it started in the first, we're sports fans, it It started not even at the top of the first inning, but like on the on-deck circle. When he started offering these mandates to public schools all over the Commonwealth as it applied to COVID. And here the public schools were like, hey, shouldn't we at the local level have the autonomy to determine how our school's going to be run based on that data, the COVID data? Junkin said, no, it's my way or the highway here. So that shift was immediate. The question I have for you, is that campaigning? Is that disingenuous? Is that how the game is played?
Well, it is kind of how the game is played, and it is somewhat disingenuous. He really almost had two campaigns. When he gets into the Southwest and the South Side, where there are a lot of Trump voters, he would downplay separation from Trump. And it really worked well for him, because if you look at how he won with huge margins in the redder areas of the Commonwealth. He cut into the Democratic vote in Northern Virginia, the soccer moms thing. It's funny. I have a good friend, former delegate of mine, and we were thinking about this after the election. And he made a comment. He said, "Look, after four years of Trump, the Democrats felt that they had won over women in Northern Virginia, when in reality they were only renting them for 4 years." And when Junkin started the campaign and he pushed the buttons a little bit different, some of those folks moved over to the Republican side and voted for Junkin. But you're right. Once he got into office, the first day there were 10 executive orders, one on COVID, one on the schools could not discuss what were inherently divisive concepts, whatever the heck that means. And now we're finding out that it means you can't really discuss our history and the racial oppression that's been part of Virginia for so many years. He also issued an executive order that pulled Virginia, or at least tried to pull Virginia out of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which was the climate change initiative that Virginia signed on to with about 10 or 11 other eastern states, that actually brings money to the Commonwealth while we're addressing climate change. Now, it's not clear that legally he could do any of this. And in fact, the Reggie thing is being contested in the courts right now, and I don't think he can do anything about it by executive order. But it didn't matter. These were all political statements. These were not governance statements. And if you look at the inherently divisive concepts issue, this is going to be a theme that's replayed again and again and again in Virginia over the next few years. And education is going to be the contested terrain upon which people will be fighting in Virginia about what you can teach your children and how you can teach them.
Education, I call this a political battlefield in the Commonwealth.
Absolutely.
There are landmines everywhere.
Everywhere. Everything from funding. Remember, only 10% of education funding comes from the federal government. It's all state. And so when you've got the purse strings, you can make a big difference in how schools do their curriculum.
Exactly. And we'll localize it. Let's localize it here. And let's talk public schools local. This really is a microcosm of a lot of things. Western Albemarle High School and Henley Middle School, from an Albemarle County public school system, are in a lot of ways the crown jewels performance-wise. I'm talking SOL results. Western and Henley are the top performers. Enrollment at Western and Henley is dropping.
Huh.
I've been in this community 22 years and counting. Never would I have thought that enrollment at Western and Henley would be dropping. If anything, in the 22 years I've been in this community, people were sprinting to these school districts. Old Trail is a perfect example of that in Western Albemarle. The boom of Old Trail, the neighborhood. So let's talk about the political battlefield that are public schools. The school buses we talked about off air before the show started are showing up an hour to 2 hours late. The children, and Kevin Higgins, who watches the program all the time, we've dubbed him the King of Greenwood, the suburb of Crozet, Greenwood. And he said his kids and kids in Greenwood are showing up to school 2 hours late. He extrapolated that over the course of a year. that means the children are missing 1/3 of the school year. Oftentimes, the children that are riding the school bus are coming from families where both parents work. If it's a one-parent working family, whoever, mom or dad, whoever's not working, probably would drive the kid to school to solve a 2-hour delay. So these are the kids that are perhaps on the financial margin, the kids that perhaps are struggling academically, and now they're arriving 2 hours later than ever before. As a result, these parents in general, are putting kids in private school at a greater frequency and clip. This has a snowball effect, and perhaps you can enlighten us here. Enrollment determines funding. When enrollment falls, funding falls. When funding falls, schools have less resources.
Right, it becomes a cycle, downward cycle.
Downward cycle, and the wild card, and I'll get out of your way, the wild card is this: school vouchers, which is another topic. Anywhere you want to go on this?
Oh boy, I could go a zillion ways on this, but
the whole show is yours.
It is true that there are more private school options than there used to be, and the county and the city wealth of the county and the city have been increasing within certain segments. Not all segments, but it's a wealthier city and a wealthier county than it was 10 years ago, and that gives people more options. The other thing that's impacted here is the local funding, because there's a lot of money that comes from the localities that go into these systems, and the local taxpayers are stressed when they think they have to pick up the tab, especially if they're retirees and they don't have kids in schools. We've been in a unique position in this community that for years and decades, even people who don't have children in the schools, in the public schools, have been big supporters in investing in those public schools because they realize that those are good investments for the community as a whole. You don't want to have that situation, that attitude undermined. So the county's going to have to fix a lot of these problems, and you've got similar problems in the city. And you also, COVID really created huge problems for youngsters and their ability to learn. And those problems were more pronounced and in places where the kids where the families aren't as wealthy, more diversity. And we have to address those problems because we need a really good and talented workforce in the coming years. And we really, frankly, need to give more people a greater opportunity to succeed wherever they go, whether they're taking a job out of high school or they're going off to Brown or Berkeley. So we got to make sure those investments are there, and we have to make sure that those policies are straight so the kids have an opportunity to learn.
Vanessa Parkhill, we'll get to your comments here in a matter of moments. Spencer, we'll get to your comments in a matter of moments. Viewers and listeners from all over the Commonwealth on the feed, we're going to be highlighting David Toscano's 2 books here on today's program, where you can get them, where you can buy them, why you should read them. We're talking government in the Commonwealth from a local level, from a Commonwealth-wide level. We saw a governor go from running a centered, somewhat neutral, somewhat parent empowerment campaign to one, once he got into office, that undoubtedly started leaning way righter. And most recently, certainly more way right, is the transgender topic in schools that Junkin has come out with. And a lot of folks in the Commonwealth here are left scratching their head and say, hey, Governor Junkin, where's all this stuff coming from here? Yeah. The speculation, the chat around the water cooler, is that these are topics that are being utilized for the pursuit potentially of a higher office. Mm-hmm. You buy that?
Oh, I do buy that. I think he knows that he's term limited in Virginia. We have a one-term governor, and that's one of the unique situations in Virginia discussed in the Fighting Political Gridlock book. And he's traveling all over the country, and he's endorsing people who have very far right-wing views. People who run for governor in Maine and Arizona, folks who embrace the stop the steal idea that somehow Trump really won the election when in fact all the court cases and everything else suggested he didn't. So even though he's not campaigning with Donald Trump, he's certainly campaigning with Donald Trump lookalikes and tell-alikes. So he's out there, whether he'll make the jump, it's very hard. Lots of Virginia governors have thought about running for president, and no one for a long time has been able to make that jump. I think it's going to be hard for Junkin, but stranger things can happen. Nobody thought that Donald Trump could win when he came down the escalator in Trump Tower in New York in 2016.
Do you think it's as a vice president or as a president?
Oh, I think it's more likely to be president.
You think so?
To run for president. But, I might say one other thing, and this is are things people can learn about in the books. Most states fund education through some kind of formula. And in Virginia, we've had that formula in place for decades, very rarely adjusted. And the big changes over the last few decades, as you have more children in the public schools who are more in need of intervention, we call them, quote, at-risk kids. There has been what they call an add-on to the school funding formula. And I know this sounds a little wonkish, but it really is important if people are going to understand what are the inputs into the school, how do they get their resources. There's been an add-on, which is called an at-risk add-on, whereby divisions get certain money, extra money because of that. But it's not built into the formula. And I think it's time that we looked at building it into the formula so it can't be taken away year by year depending where the budget goes. North Carolina has now been in a 2-decade-long fight over school funding. And in fact, one thing people don't know, that the United States Constitution does not guarantee people the right to an education, but almost every single state constitution does. And so you see lawsuits brought in states like Kansas, North Carolina, which tries to force the state legislature to adequately fund the schools. In Kansas, it became the key issue that got Laura Kelly, a Democrat, elected last time around instead of Sam Brownback in Kansas.
We'll go to comments, viewers and listeners.
Oh, sure.
Comments from zip codes all over the Commonwealth. First, we'll go to some of our loyal viewers and listeners. Let's go to Vanessa Parkhill in Earlysville, Virginia. She says, with Junkin, was it a shift regarding COVID policy in schools, or was it a shift of returning power to families and not necessarily the school system? She basically, and Vanessa, I think this is what you're alluding to. With Junkin, was the idea empower the parents? Was the idea let's manage COVID? Or was the idea winning office is what she's going for here?
Well, I don't know Governor Junkin at all, really, because he came onto the scene pretty much as I was transitioning out. He hasn't called me, asked for advice. So I don't know him very well. So I really don't know what was in his head when he did these things. But, the trans policies, I think they're an abomination. And I think that we'd be better off focusing on what the policy should be at the local level. The risk is, for parents, if you think about this, if the state government can come in and dictate to localities, local school divisions, what they should be doing in the classroom, the state can also dictate to the parents what they should be doing with their kids in the classroom. So if you like parental empowerment, you ought to try to embrace it at the local level.
School board.
With working through the school boards and the boards of supervisors and the council, and let the localities come up with these policies tailored to the locality's needs. And that's another reason why I didn't embrace the notion of having one COVID policy across the Commonwealth. I think, the mask policies should be based on the scientific evidence and how people interpret that at the local level. And
based on the data at the local level.
At the local level. Now,
yeah.
I think a lot of these red states made mistakes. And if you look at the COVID data about deaths, it showed up in the death rates. But that's a thing they decided to do, and I think it was a mistake, but it's kind of the nature of our federalist system, and it's based on the idea that the decisions that are best are made by those that are made by representatives closest to the people, like school boards, boards of supervisors, with parental input.
Ray Cadell watching the program He loves to give you props on the show.
Yeah, he should play some music for the show.
One of the best horn players on the East Coast, Ray Cadell. He says this, David Toscano, we are the parents of 3 public school kids, all boys, and our youngest child, a girl, was at the Covenant School from 2nd through the 12th grade. If I thought she was safe, educated well, and her school led by an administration that had things under control there, I could have saved $200,000 or so that I could use now as a 68-year-old. From her principal that day, I went in to meet. The principal said, you have to understand, I'm overwhelmed here and not much of a communicator. That's what the principal told us as parents. Not the public school principal, not the private school principal, but the public school principal. Ray then says, this is a systematic problem in schools, and we live in the Carsbrook neighborhood, by the way.
Yeah, and in the middle of one of the best school divisions in the entire Commonwealth.
That's why he said the neighborhood, yeah.
And you know, so I understand because, you know, public school is not the best thing for every student or for every family. And I think it's people ought to make their decisions based on what they see at the time. You know, I made decisions with my youngster. I made some decisions to put him one place versus the other based on what I saw. And I respect people who do that. At the same time, and this is not, it's not a you know, we don't do it for our individual family, but we do it for the community. We have to engage in the school division, because if we leave it to the people with whom we have a disagreement and just let them run the show, then we're going to end up with a school division that's spiraling down, and we're not going to have a good workforce when we need it, and we're not going to give people opportunities who can't get opportunities by going to a private school.
That's a perfect segue to the school voucher topic that's being percolated. I believe Arizona the first in the free union to roll out the voucher system. Kevin Yancey, welcome to the program in Waynesboro. We'll get to your comment here in a matter of moments, sir. Open-ended question, David. School voucher and the ideas that are being percolated with valuing public schools, setting a dollar amount on a year's worth of public school education, monetizing it or valuing it, and then saying potentially to the parents, here's a check for that, do what you want from an education standpoint. Well,
there are big challenges involved in that particular approach to it. I mean, you could embrace a voucher program. Well, there's some constitutional questions there, but you could embrace some program where people get a credit if they go to private schools. And we have tried to do some things and targeting it to people who have kids with disabilities, because sometimes there's some uniqueness to their educational challenges. They're very difficult to meet in public schools. But the risk in your approach, Jerry, is that because if you start doing that, you start taking more money out of the public schools, and you potentially lose your economies of scale. And when that happens, then the public has to invest more per pupil in the public schools, and you exacerbate the problems financially that the public schools have. So we're going to have to find a way where you inject some degrees of choice into schools, I think, without undermining their financial viability by creating too much of an advantage for people to pull their kids out, leaving the school division with students who have the most challenges in being educated, as opposed to having a diverse school division where you have some kids who can do really well and other people who need more massive inputs.
You said it very well. The voucher system, if not handled or managed correctly, could create a bastion of financially margined students in public schools, where the middle class, upper class are learning in a private school setting, which would further widen the education gap in the Commonwealth. A very slippery slope.
Yeah, but we want to make sure that the public schools understand that the slippery slope also goes for people who can walk with their feet, and they just decide to pull out because they've had it, they're not going to take it anymore, they're going to pull out, they've got the means to do so, they don't care about the vouchers. They've got the means to do so.
And that's happening.
And that is happening.
Yeah.
So you've got to pay attention to the policies that engage parents and engage the community so they embrace the public schools as something to defend.
So what do you're a big picture guy. You're a man with vision here. So what's the advice you give to all these parents that are watching the program that are very, very, very pro public school? Is it get involved with the school board, run?
Get in the game. The cardinal rule of politics is the decisions are made by those in the room at the time. So get in the room. So if you want to run for school board, do that. If you want to be on a parent advisory council, do that. The PTA, the PTO. If you want to just form a neighborhood group that meets with a principal or teachers, do that. Just get engaged. Don't be unrealistic. Don't think that just because I have the idea that I'm right, you know, accept the notion that maybe I have to approach this with some humility. I may not have the right answers. You got some people who have expertise built up over years in education, but engage. And the best school divisions are people who get engaged and respect each other. The administrators respect parents, the parents respect the administrators, and the kids benefit by that. You know, in our world these days, politics is so nationalized that people want to scream at each other as opposed to sit down and work together. Hopefully, we'll change some of that, but it's going to take sound minds and patient people to work on it.
More questions coming in. Let's go to Lynchburg. This is a very good question from Lynchburg, folks that watch this program here. If Delegate Sally Hudson chooses to pursue State Senator Creed Deeds' seat, how does Delegate David Toscano think this will play out?
I think it's a terrible idea. I mean, Creed Deeds has served this community for years and years and years. He has voted with the values of this community for years and years and years. I think I think he probably easily would win primary unless some big-pocketed individual all of a sudden drops $200,000 in the race.
Which that's happened? Are you that happened? You know that firsthand?
Which could happen here.
Okay.
I think it
Should we say who that could be? I could.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to get involved. I'm not getting involved in it. But the other thing, I mean, this is just a very terrible comment about the nationalization of politics. You know, people are thinking of these things in terms of, oh, who's the most progressive, who's this, who's that. When you got a good person representing you and they represent the community values, why would you ever want to turn them out? So, you know, I'm a big supporter of Creed. I work with him. He's done a lot in the General Assembly. I don't understand the rationale for anybody challenging them but him. But certainly it's their right. People can challenge anybody at any time for any reason.
Is it a challenge that is, I believe if Delegate Hudson does pursue this challenge, and my instinct says she will. She's come on this show multiple times. She's a hard worker. She's genuine. I also think she understands opportunity. It's a different district now.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very different district.
Well, it is a different district, but the core of the district is still Charlottesville and Albemarle. It's always been that way. The part of the district in Albemarle that was added is more conservative. And to the south, there are a lot more conservative elements. It's not Bath County. Of course, everybody knew Creed and Bath because he was over there. But, you know, the thing, I mean, I would hope that people wouldn't drop a whole bunch of money in a race like that. It's in the book. I mean, people want to know who is investing in campaigns. And, you know, everybody criticizes the right for investing in campaigns. But there are people on the left that try to throw the money around too. You're talking millions of dollars. And it's all in the book. People can read about it.
A lot of comments coming in for you. You're a popular man.
Well, that's good. We'll see after I finish the program.
Carol, Carol Thorpe, the Queen of Jack Jewett, has got a comment for you. Carol, we love when you watch the program. She says, in a follow-up to David's opinions about the strength of autonomy of schools on the local level, is it time to reconsider the need of the role, expense, size, or even existence of federal and state education departments?
Oh, that's a big question. And that goes again to the nationalization of politics. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt you need a State Department of Education because they're the people, well, they're not the only people, but they help create the curriculum. I mean, that's what's being debated now in Richmond. Junkin is trying to put his people on the board, State Board of Education. He has replaced the northern people at the Department of Education largely with his people, and there will be a debate about proper curriculum. And I think given the state's funding of education primarily, that debate should occur in Richmond. It should involve legislators, the governor, the administrators, et cetera. Now, the U.S. Department of Education is a different kettle of fish because they're not as actively engaged in local school board or school affairs. The last time we really saw this was during the Bush administration when they passed No Child Left Behind, which was an effort to increase standards by which kids learn and make schools accountable for hitting those standards. We have similar standards in Virginia, the standards of learning, but No Child Left Behind is no longer there. And so it's sort of retreated into the background. And now the Education Department sets some general policies, but most of it has to do with providing grant monies to various jurisdictions in the states to do certain things. So I guess the answer is, I'm not sure about, I don't think I'd abolish the Department of Education, but it doesn't have the role I think maybe some people think it does in state affairs, and I certainly wouldn't abolish the Department of Education at the state level.
This is coming in from a mom of two. The assumption with the vouchers is that parents will move their kids to private school. That may not be true. Maybe the parents want to move away from one public school to another public school. So many moving parts to this. Yep,
so many moving parts. In fact, I remember when I was in local government, we actually experimented with the notion of creating choice at the elementary school level. Let people drive their kids to whatever school they wanted to. And
did that have legs?
There's some limited experiments, and there's a little bit of a choice element in the open enrollment that used to occur whereby Albemarle kids could come to Charlottesville largely for the music and arts program, and they'd pay a tuition. And so there is an element of choice in that. I think, frankly, that right now we're trying to recover from the COVID problem. We got to get that straight first. Then we can start talking about choice. But if we talk about it too early, the system, which is very tenuous right now, could be upended in a way that's very difficult to put back together.
Fantastic question coming in here, and we're going to get to the two books here. We have so many questions coming in for you here, David Toscano. Can someone win? This is an interesting question. Can someone win the president's office? We're talking president of the country without Virginia.
Yeah, sure enough. I mean, if you look at it in the last election, a flip of less than 1 million votes in 3 states might have made Trump the president, even though he lost Virginia. So yeah, that certainly can happen. Now, Virginia does have an important role to play. It is kind of a bellwether. Is that a book title?
David Toscano.
It is kind of a bellwether for what's happening around the country, and you saw the first elements of the anti-Trump activity in Virginia as Democrats picked up steam after Trump was elected. But it's 13 electoral votes. I mean, there are bigger states and more swingish states than Virginia.
A couple more, and then we'll talk the book here. Your take on the 5th district. You have an incumbent in Bob Good.
Right.
You have Josh Thronberg, who is new to the game. That's safe to say. That's safe to say. I'm not throwing shade on anyone. He's new to the game. The 5th is about as red a district as you can find.
Pretty red district, yep.
Your thoughts on this and how this race for Congress is going to play out?
Well, anything can happen in a race. You have to look at the tendencies over time. It is a pretty red district. You have a newcomer. People like newcomers. And I guess the good news for some people is he's never served in elective office. Of course, the bad news for some people, he's never served in elective office. And we'll just have to see. He's a young guy, very, very appealing guy. It seems to me very level-headed. Now, good strikes me. I've never met him, so I assume he's a nice guy. His positions are pretty extreme, but, you know, it's the 5th District. And I'm not sure whether he voted to certify the presidential electors. I'm not even sure he had a chance to vote on that. But I think he is a Trump proponent, and
definitely
Josh is not. So it's clearly a contrast, and Josh is working hard. We'll just have to see what happens.
Tom Bowe, the owner of Take It Away Sandwich Shop, is giving you some props right now. Let's talk about the books here. Let's talk Bellwether first, where we can find it, why we should read it, some of your favorite chapters and aspects of Bellwether.
Well, you can find New Dominion downtown if you want to buy it there. I'm going to do a book signing and a short reading, very short reading, at Second Act Books on Tuesday, I guess a week from next Tuesday, yeah.
Okay.
And Second Act is on the downtown mall. A good friend, Daphne Spain, a sociologist colleague of mine who opened the bookstore. So I'll be there at 6:30 on Tuesday, a week
October
from next,
18th.
October 18th, yeah. Barnes & Noble has it. They just told me they just got a couple more copies in. You can get it online and get it on Kindle. And I think people really enjoy reading it. It's not as dense as the Fighting Political Gridlock, so it has more stories about things that happen that are kind of, you know, funny things that happen. Things like that in the House of Delegates every year at the end of session there is the House Republicans used to have what was called the Sensitivity Caucus, where they would give out awards to people, tongue-in-cheek, for people who stood up on the floor the most during the course of the session. You know, they called it the Pop-Up Award, and they give out this, or people who said the dumbest thing during the course of they were all the jokes. And you can read about some of that. You can read about the serious things like Medicaid expansion and how we worked so hard to get that, and it took us 5 years to get it. You can read about redistricting and how that shaped the House of Delegates in the Commonwealth to be very, very Republican for about 10 years, until a court case overturned that plan, and 2 years later the Democrats took the majority. So these are things that where the policies and the personalities kind of intertwine to tell a story about what happened in the last 2 decades.
What have you learned from yourself with writing these 2 books?
Just to be careful and document everything, because, you know, it's one thing to get up on the House floor and just kind of shoot from the hip. I always like to be prepared, but occasionally you say things that you're not quite sure of. When you write, and you write something on a piece of paper, you better be sure it's documented, at least in my view. Not enough people do that these days. They just write whatever the hell they want to write. But I like to document it. I learned that. I also was able to remember a lot more things in writing about it than I think I would have if I just left without writing down.
Are we going to see this as the journey or the springboard of a potentially prolific writer here? We have more percolating?
Well, I've been writing a lot of short form pieces now.
Op-eds?
If you go to my website, and I had an op-ed in the Richmond Times-Dispatch this week, gently criticizing my former colleague, Attorney General Mieres, for trying to take over some local prosecutors' offices and how they prosecute cases. And God love him, he responded by writing an op-ed of his own justifying his views, which is perfect because you want to have that exchange of information, exchange of views in the paper. I've written some things for the Harvard Innovation and Leadership Group about what's called state preemption, which is the state coming in and taking over, preventing localities from enacting certain laws that the localities may want to do. I put out things about post-Dobbs, the implications of the abortion issue in the aftermath of Dobbs on states, that talks about the fact that there are some 12 states in the United States who have constitutions that include a right to privacy in the Constitution itself, unlike the United States Constitution. And you're seeing litigation now, which is challenging some of the draconian anti-abortion rules on constitutional grounds, on state constitutional grounds. And that's very different. I've written about voting rights. Again, there is no right to vote in the U.S. Constitution, but in every state constitution, there is a right to vote. And you're seeing increasing litigation about whether the voting rules are fair in states. So my role is to try to educate myself and others about what's going on in the states, what's going on in Virginia, maybe to help people make decisions.
An hour without commercials flies by with this man. David Toscano is a host's dream.
I got lots more.
You are a host's dream. I want to highlight this and put a nugget in your brain. You're so good as a wordsmith and as a, you have the gift of communication and human connection, which you know you have. You know you have. A podcast, the David Toscano Show, where you highlight the books and your op-eds and your website. That is media 2022, where then you could utilize that as your platform to highlight your books and everything else that's in your diaries, your journals, and what you've been documenting. Just put that out there. I want to give you an opportunity to close anywhere you want, and I promise, we will reach out to you again about getting you back on the show many times.
Well, it's great to be on, and I tell you, the Commonwealth is a different place than when I took office. I had some demographic data about the changes in the Commonwealth. It's a much less whiter place than it used to be. And over 50% of the people who live in Virginia were not born here. In contrast, that number was about 20% back in the 1950s. That's a big change.
What do you associate that with? Economic development and jobs?
Economic development, jobs, people moving from the north, kind of migrating. And 12%, 13% now of the Virginia population is foreign-born. Most of them are citizens, foreign-born. They have higher educational attainment, ironically, than Virginia-born citizens. But they are changing the Commonwealth, especially up north. Fairfax, Prince William County. These are places that have changed demographically dramatically. And when that change came, the Democrats started winning races.
David Toscano. The website, David, people are asking?
www.davidtoscano.com. Really easy. I'm the only Toscano around.
It's fantastic. You were a joy.
Thanks.
It's an absolute joy. For those that are asking, the entire interview will be archived on ilovecville.com and on every social media platform possible, wherever you get your podcast. David Toscano's got 2 books, Fighting Political Gridlock. You see it right here, Fighting Political Gridlock, and Bellwether. I encourage all the viewers and listeners to buy the book and to learn about the Commonwealth. It is absolutely fantastic reading. Judah Wickhauer is the director of the program. My name is Jerry Miller. This show back at 12:30 tomorrow on the I Love CVille Network. Thank you kindly for joining us. Take care. That was awesome. He's going to let us know when the mics are off here.